Welcome back to The Point. As millions of Americans celebrated the Christmas holiday this week, little joy reached the White House. Wednesday marks day 5 of the U.S. government's partial shutdown, which began at midnight on Friday. Funding for U.S. President Donald Trump's proposed U.S.-Mexico border wall triggered the latest stalemate. The House passed a bill for $5.7 billion in funding for border security, including the wall. But the proposal cannot pass without the support of the Democrats. The blame game has begun, with Trump lashing out over Twitter, saying that the Democrats now own the shutdown. The Democrats have fired back, accusing Trump of throwing temper tantrums and plunging the country into chaos. So what's really behind this latest government gridlock? What progress can we expect? And as 2018 draws to a close, what is the outlook for U.S. politics and Trump's White House in 2019? Joining me for the discussion in Beijing studio is Mr. Zhang Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics, and also from Taipei, Mr. Ross Feingold, Asia Political Analyst and former Asia Chairman of Republicans Abroad. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen. So let's first talk about the catalyst for this latest U.S. government shutdown. Trump wants to build a U.S.-Mexico border wall to curb illegal immigration, a major pillar of his campaign. The House proposed a funding bill, but the Democrats won't approve it, calling the wall, I'm quoting their words, expensive, ineffective, and immoral. My first question goes to you, Professor Gong. Why has this wall issue become such a contentious issue between the two sides?
I think this, the effectiveness of this wall is very much in doubt. It may cost $5 billion, and it's not so clear that it can stop drugs, can stop illegal immigration. So in my opinion, it's a total waste of money. And I think from Trump's administration's perspective, he sees this as the last opportunity before next year in the Congress, where the Democrats are going to take control. So he's doing this very much as a as a bargaining play, as well as a political maneuver to demonstrate to his support base that he's serious about this war. I think that's the background of all this. And of course, he doesn't have the votes in the Senate. He needs 60 votes, and so he's doing this as a political play.
So, Mr. Feingold, talk to us about the situation there. The Democrats said they would approve $1.3 billion for border security, the same amount that was approved for the 2018 budget. What has changed in terms of border security between last year and this year?
Well, there's two very different narratives from each side. On the Republican side and from the White House, so the Republicans in Congress as well as from the White House, there is the ongoing concern about border security. As you said, this is something that President Trump campaigned on. And tens of millions of Americans do agree that a wall is the necessary course of action. So for President Trump to seek to fulfill his campaign promise, this is something that many Americans agree with. Obviously, not all Americans, but many Americans, tens of millions, do agree with President Trump and the Republicans in Congress. For the Democrats, they're obviously feeling very confident coming out of their successful House election in November and looking forward to taking over control of the House in January. So they feel that they could ride this out, and they don't want to give in to President Trump in the final days of this Congress. And thus, as you said, we're now in a stalemate.
And Mr. Feingold, let's talk about what's next here. Now, Trump has hinted that this shutdown may last a very long time. So what kinds of negotiations are taking place this week, and what needs to happen on either side for a meaningful breakthrough to emerge? What do you think?
Well, the key word right there is meaningful. So how do we get to a meaningful breakthrough? Clearly, the Democrats are going to have to agree to more money for border security. Whether it's called a wall or fencing or it's used for other types of technology or personnel, there's probably room for both sides to have a compromise. But the Democrats are going to have to move from the dollar amount. And whether or not they're willing to do this, we'll see in the coming days as Americans return to work, as Congress returns to work, hopefully, following the Christmas holiday. But there is going to need to be an agreement to spend more money. And if the Democrats are serious, that they do see the significance of the need for more border security, then they'll have no choice, because that is what the American public wants. And to be fair to the Democrats, they're not against border security, but it's how to go about it. And again, spending more money is going to be one solution that will get the two sides to reach an agreement.
Well, Professor Ghosn, what's your response to that? Is the progress in Trump's hands or Democrats' hands? Do you agree with what's been said? What factors will determine how long the standoff will last?
Well, ultimately, whether the American people support this thing is decided by the Congress, by the Senate. The fact that it hasn't passed in the Senate speaks volume for how America agrees with that. So I'm totally in disagreement with the fact that there's enough support for this war among American people, and also with respect to the way it was portrayed to the American people. With the new Congress in session next year, it's the prospect of this war is further going to be in doubt. In my own opinion, I think the idea that a war can stop something like this, stop illegal drugs, stop illegal immigration, is very much doubtful. I mean, it can't even stop an invasion. I mean, in China, we've built this great wall for centuries, and that hasn't stopped the northern nomadic tribes of invading China. So, I think it's the same thing here, that this war is not going to be effective. It's a total waste of time, in my opinion. We're talking about, a $5 billion for a stretch of 500 miles. We're talking about $10 million for each mile of war that do nothing. This is going to be the biggest monument on the southern border. It's not going to do anything. American people can be better off by spending this money on something else, on education, on supporting the new great technology development, anything else. I mean, we need. Donald Trump has been talking about make America great again by building out the infrastructure. Now, you build infrastructure along the border for war, for doing this. It's just amazing to me. I mean, we haven't seen any real actions out of this administration about the infrastructure build out. In the middle of the year, he talked about providing some federal money as a matching fund for inviting private investment to make investment into American infrastructure. That hasn't happened yet. It's a blank check. There's nothing happening in that regard at all. Now he wants to spend $5 billion on war. It's a monument to me.
Let me give Mr. Feingold a chance to respond here. What do you think? How effective will the wall be in preventing illegal immigration?
Well, there's no doubt that $5 billion is an extraordinary amount of money. On the other hand, given the size of our federal budget, $5 billion is a relatively small amount of money, and compared to what the United States spends on security, whether domestic or overseas, $5 billion is also a relatively small amount of money. I don't think it's fair to say that a wall does not work. The issue is whether or not it's value for the money versus other options such as more personnel, greater use of fencing, technology such as cameras and drones. Ultimately, if we're going to be having this conversation a few years from now, probably large stretches of the border will have a type of wall, and will also be combined with technology, which is probably going to distinguish it from the Great Wall of China and its ineffectiveness in keeping invaders out thousands of years ago. Obviously, this kind of wall, and there are other examples around the world. This is not a novel idea that the United States or the Trump administration has. Obviously, a wall would be combined with technology that would make it more effective.
All right, I'm seeing Professor Ghosn shaking his head. Obviously, we're getting different perspectives, but remember, this week marks the third government shutdown during Trump's term already. The first was in January 2018, primarily concerned another immigration issue, the deferred action for childhood arrivals, and it lasted 3 days. And the second was just a month later in February. It revolved around the 2018 bipartisan 2-year spending bill, and it only lasted a day, 9 hours to be exact. What's the difference this time? Can the same tactics that helped resolve previous shutdowns be used this time, Mr. Feingold?
Well, the interesting thing is this period that we're in now compared to before, because we're in the short amount of time before the House changes control over to the Democrats. So the Democrats are trying to sit back now and say, well, this is a Republican issue because there's a Republican in the White House, and the Republicans control both the House and the Senate. Obviously, as we discussed, a bill cannot be passed into law without the support of some Democrats, especially on the Senate side. But once we reach the new year and the Democrats are the majority in the House, they will have to take some ownership of this dispute if it's not resolved in the next few days and it spills over after the new year. So the Democrats are in many ways taking a big gamble because they cannot avoid responsibility after the new year, because the public will also say, Democrats, you have to compromise as well. You can no longer just point the finger at a Republican majority and say that you have no control over what goes on or passes through the House. So the Democrats are taking a gamble, and we'll see how much they're willing to compromise after the new year should this not be resolved in the coming few days before the 31st.
Now, please.
Yeah. Well, this is typical Trump politics. I mean, this is typical Trump tactics. I mean, it's a hardball politics. I mean, he has this negotiation style that he plays hardball. And you know, this is a fight picked by Donald Trump himself. And in fact, he said he's proud to shut down the government. So I'm not sure, you know, the Democrat side should take any blame of this. But go ahead. Sorry.
Now, Trump's no stranger to firing off angry tweets. But Monday, on Christmas Eve, was an especially busy day, even by the president's standards, with him posting 10 tweets in 3 hours. One tweet read, "I'm all alone in the White House waiting for the Democrats to come back and make a deal on desperately needed border security." I mean, what psychological portrait does this tweet paint of the U.S. president? I'm hearing critics also saying that this is a picture of a lost and damaged soul. There's nothing sad and poignant about a president isolated and alone. These are sad, sad words, Professor Gong.
Well, it's not just a damaged soul. I think, in my opinion, it's a lost soul. You know, it's very bothering to me that the president of the United States, you know, the most powerful person, the most powerful country, can write something like this, and it's very, very bothering. You know, I think the speculation that this president has some psychological problem is nothing new here. I mean, there's already several people have come out and said this. Even people from the psychiatrist community are saying things like this. And you know, this person is in control of the government of the most powerful country. And if we take that into the context of other disputes with other countries, including with China, for example, with respect to this trade war. This is very, very bothering to me.
And Mr. Feingold, what do you make of all this? Do you think that these kind of tweets will make a difference?
Well, one thing we know for sure is that it's extraordinarily irresponsible for any medical professional to try and diagnose the president without having met him in person. So that's just very typical of the criticism that the president gets. And it's not a surprise that people dislike his tweets. It's been that way since he was a candidate for president, and certainly over the past 2 years since he was sworn in as president. And there's just as many people who dislike him as people who like him. And the same goes for his style and the way he negotiates. But to say that he's a hardball negotiator is a fair observation, but we shouldn't omit from that conversation that the other side, the Democrats, are also hardball negotiators. And as I said earlier, the Democrats feel right now that they don't need to be in that negotiation because they could say it's a Republican-controlled Congress. But after the new year, the Democrats are going to have to negotiate. They'll be in the leadership in the House, and they'll be just as difficult and hardball negotiators as President Trump is.
And do you think that, Mr. Feingold, besides concerns over the effectiveness, cost, and overall morality of building the wall, do the Democrats have ulterior motives for blocking Trump's demand at this stage?
Well, one could be cynical and say they just want to make the president look bad, and that's why they're being so difficult in the negotiations. Obviously, they have other priorities that they want to spend money on. That's not a secret. They want to spend money on a different set of priorities than the current Republican majorities or that the White House does. And we're going to continue to see this. We do have to be prepared as observers, as business people, that in the coming months, all the way through till the next presidential and congressional election in November 2020, that we're going to see some very difficult negotiating and back and forth between the House, the Senate, and the White House. That is the reality for the coming months.
All right, the reality that we all have to face. Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for now. We're going to have to leave it here. In the Beijing studio, Professor Zhang Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics, and joining us in Taipei, Mr. Ross Feingold, Asia political analyst and former Asia chairman of Republicans Abroad. That's all for this edition of The Point. As always, follow us on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.